Hello and welcome to Cinema to the Letter. This episode, it's that new film known as Another Round. On Cinema to the Letter, we break down the very nature of cinema, letter by letter. For each episode of a film miniseries topic, we cover 6 films that fit a C for classic, I for indie, N for new, E for egregious, M for masterpiece, and A for atypical. Because who doesn't love an acronym, am I right? I am Thomas, and I'll tell you when I've had enough.
Oh, hello. I am Bryan, and I think I would do really well in the lake race, personally.
I mean, look, we all try it at some point. You know, you just
Running around a lake with
right.
like 6 other people.
Exactly. Yes. But welcome everybody to Cinema to the Letter, where we are reaching the midway point of our Oscar season, our one Oscar season specifically, and we're about to talk about a very interesting movie from a very odd year in terms of especially Oscar history, because this is the second film we've done from 2020 specifically, because we did Tenet.
Oh, we did do Tenet, yeah.
Right. Yes. So we're kind of like going back on this year, and you know, it's sometimes hard to go back to 2020 for a variety of reasons.
Why? What was going on that year?
I mean, you know, so much really when you think about it. Like Parasite won Best Picture earlier that year.
God, yeah, it did. It feels like it was like 30 years ago.
Truly, like many people say that was the last good thing, and I tend to agree. That was like the last good thing that happened.
Right.
Before it all came crumbling apart. But of course, 2020, the actual year in terms of like Oscar stuff, would be the following April, and have that weird kind of mix where that was the Oscars where it was like both 2020 and 2021 were kind of applicable, like for up to like what, February of 2021, I think.
Yeah, I still find it quite frustrating because there's movies like Minari, as well as Judas and the Black Messiah, which are like they're 2021 films, but they counted for the 2020 Oscars, which I get it. It was, you know, a difficult time for, like, you know, there weren't that many movies as much as you would normally get in a normal year, but I still kind of find it a bit frustrating. But you know, it is what it is.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the Nomadland year, and the year where they were at the train station, which was interesting because I still maintain before that ending, I think it was an interesting Oscars. Not like a great Oscars, but not like the worst Oscars I had seen up to that point. And I would figure you might defend it, Bryan, because your boy Steven Soderbergh produced that Oscars.
He did, yeah. That was I also agree. I think that it was mostly a decent show. It was very casual. I remember like the room they were in was like a pretty, like, you know, very nice room, and like the vibes.
Right, it was a train station, which was very unique because it was like big and open air. So they could kind of like walk around. And there was the whole like floating camera thing, which I found interesting, where like they would announce the nominees and they would have like a big one shot of like focusing on the different people, which I thought was interesting. There were some things I wish we would kind of taken from that Oscars and continued forth with.
Was this also the year that Questlove was doing like DJing?
Yes.
Yeah,
right.
That's what I remember as well.
I remember that mainly because everyone, whenever they think about this Oscars, always will go back to Joaquin Phoenix awkwardly announcing that Anthony Hopkins won and couldn't be here that night. And then they cut immediately to Questlove, like, hey everybody, well I hope you had a fun time.
Good night, yeah. Very weird moment, which, yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother situation. But
also weird realizing that guy went from DJing the Oscars to winning an Oscar the following year.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, he's great. I mean, we love Questlove.
Right. Everyone's favorite uncle who really likes music. The uncle who turned you on to like your favorite bands, basically.
We were deciding what to do for this one, and
right.
there's a few movies from 2020 that, like, no offense to Nomadland, I liked that movie, but like I haven't really thought about it since it won Best Picture, and like, which can happen with a lot of Best Picture winners, but like this movie in particular was kind of one of these ones that really kind of stuck around and has stuck with me personally, and I think you kind of feel the same way.
Yeah, because shout out to Rafe Telsch's show, Have Not Seen This, which hasn't released a new episode in quite a while, but that was the first year I started doing like his Oscar special thing, where I would get together with him and Mel Gore and Emily Slade, and we would just talk about like the big nominees. And so this was like the first year I remember like really like just filling out every single category. I tend to do that in general, but there'll always be one or two I don't watch, and I'm like, oh, whatever, it's fine. Doesn't matter to me. But that was the first year where I kind of like actively tried to like watch everything. And it was fascinating just going through, because I think that's, I would argue, the most mixed bag of the Oscars we've gotten like since, where it's like,
A bit.
I would say there's like a fair amount of like interesting winners like this movie. Even Anthony Hopkins for The Father, I think, is a very interesting win. And then
I still haven't seen that movie. I should see it.
I mean, it's a laugh riot. I can't wait. It's basically just treats dementia as like a horror movie.
Oh God.
Ostensibly. Okay. So like you'll have like interesting ones like that, and then you'll have just nominees like, I would still say, of the various bad nominees that year, like Trial of the Chicago 7 was the one that truly pissed me off, because it's just like the most Oscar baity bullshit to me.
It is still not a horrible movie. Not as bad as his next movie, I think.
Oh, well, that's true. Yes, look, Being the Ricardos is a step down, sadly. Though at the same time, I would argue, like, as much as I love a good comedic actor does like a dramatic performance, Sacha Baron Cohen, like that whole performance as Abby Hoffman is fucking awful. And I'm so baffled I got nominated for that.
It's a weird performance. I do think Yahya Abdul-Mateen II is very good in that movie, and is kind of like, I think a few of the performances in that movie are kind of what's holding it up. And Aaron Sorkin is a pretty good writer, but I think he just shouldn't direct.
No, yeah, honestly, the most interesting thing about that being nominated that year was it kind of acted as like the Darkest Hour and Dunkirk thing from a couple years prior, where it was like this and Judas and the Black Messiah. Like they reference each other's events. And it's like cinematic universe of real history.
Yeah, I love Judas and the Black Messiah, though. That's a really phenomenal movie.
Yeah, it's a great movie. Kaluuya was worthy of winning that one for sure. But yeah, so the thing is with this Oscars, like you kind of mentioned, like with our new position for any season, we were kind of racking our brains about like what is a good movie from like the last couple Oscars that we can kind of talk about. And I think with another round, that one felt truly like the biggest surprise, especially considering it won Best International Film, which we should note, the first winner of the titled International Film Oscar.
A much better title for the category.
As opposed to Foreign Language.
Yeah, which just kind of, every time I like think about it or say it, just kind of like leaves a bad taste in my mouth, which, ugh. But International Film is a much better title, and it's international. We are kind of taking films from around the world, not just like foreign language, which it's,
a bit xenophobic, a touch xenophobic, perhaps.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was also nominated for Best Director for Thomas Vinterberg, which is one of those great examples to me of just like a weird director nom that comes almost out of the blue, where it's just like, oh, it's not part of like the Best Picture slate, but it just shows that like somebody did that exceptional a job in like not one of the front runner main movies.
I love when when like a kind of international film director will get nominated for that. I think like Cuarón got one for Roma, I think.
Well, yeah, he won, because that was like he won, his second win after Gravity and stuff,
Yeah, so it is kind of nice when like, even though the movie wasn't included in like the nominees, still they're acknowledging like, but this movie, like this guy fucking did a great job with it. We have to acknowledge him somehow.
And I'm curious, because you apparently, we both obviously tend to watch things that are related in the lead up to the episode. I noticed you were watching a couple of Vinterbergs in your own right.
I did, yeah, because I had, I was a bit familiar with him already before we kind of agreed to this, and I had even seen another round, because I had seen the film The Hunt, which we'll get to in a second, of course, but And I've also seen his film Far From the Madding Crowd with Carey Mulligan and
Right.
Matthias Schoenaerts, which is pretty good actually. But
I believe, is that his only English language movie? Right?
I believe so. Yeah. Yes, I watched what is I believe his first film. I'm not entirely sure, called The Celebration, which was part of the whole Dogma '95 thing. I don't know how much you want to dive into this whole thing, but
Well, I mean, explain it for the people in case they aren't aware of what Dogma 95 is.
So basically, it was this kind of collective of, I believe they were all Danish filmmakers, the most notable of which is Thomas Vinterberg and Lars von Trier. And it was basically this kind of list of principles/rules of making a movie that they wanted to follow. And a lot of them don't follow those rules. Like even the films that Lars von Trier made don't follow like the exact dogma exactly. But The Celebration is that movie. It's a movie that's shot with like those early digital cameras. And so, but it is a movie that was released in 1988, and it is about this family coming together at this manor, basically, to celebrate the father's 60th birthday. And it is a movie about a very fucked up family, and things are revealed. It is this very, very interesting portrait of this very fucked up family. It is phenomenal. I had heard about it for like a few years because it's Dogma #1. Like it's the very first movie in this kind of like Dogma '95 collection, I guess.
Right, the one that if you pick up the Criterion, it's literally just like a leaflet in a clear case and then the 2 discs,
Yes.
basically. Which is a very, like, the commitment to the bid I appreciate.
Yeah. But it's a phenomenal movie. Like a really, really incredible movie that kind of really knocked my socks off a bit. Like, and it's, the look of it, of course, is like that early digital. It's shot by Anthony Dodd Mantle, who I think people might know from like, he shot a few Danny Boyle films and like, stuff like that. But so I watched that movie, which is incredible. It is not my recommendation, but I'm going to just recommend anyone watch that movie. It's really, really incredible. And then I also watched what I guess is the movie he made before Another Round, which is called Kursk, which is about the Kursk submarine in the year 2000 that had exploded, and it's an okay movie.
Okay.
It's kind of a I only compare it to The Hunt for Red October because it's on a submarine and it's kind of an action drama thriller kind of thing. It's got like Matthias Schoenaerts, Lea Seydoux is in it, Colin Firth, great kind of small role by Max von Sydow. It's a bit boring, to be honest. It could use a bit of like Hunt for Red October energy, to be honest, of just like pumping some life into it. But it's not a bad little movie. But and then of course I have seen, and I know that you watched his movie The Hunt, which
Yes.
I did not revisit because it is a very upsetting movie.
Which I was not aware of the premise of The Hunt at all. All I knew about The Hunt was just like that poster, which admittingly, I was kind of like, oh, that's such a great poster. I wonder, like, did they just get Mads alone for this? And then you see the shot in the movie. And it's like, fuck yeah, this is great. But basically, if you're unaware, it's a movie about Mikkelson, who plays this guy who initially was teaching at, like, a middle school or, like, a high school, but the school closed. So now he's moved to working at a kindergarten. And, he's, like, in his 40s, and he's estranged from his wife, and he's trying to get custody of his son. And then he also has sort of a friendship with this little neighbor girl who is in his kindergarten class. And they walk around, back and forth from home to school all the time because their parents are a bit distant. And he's buddies with the father, who is Thomas Bo Larsen, right? Is that guy?
Yes, he is also in The Celebration and in Another Round. He plays the biggest piece of shit in The Celebration.
Oh, okay.
He's very in the very first scene of the movie, his brother, like the main character, is walking down like a street to the manor, and he's in the car with his wife and kids, and he sees like, oh, that's my brother, let's pick him up. And then he kicks his wife and kids out of the car so that his brother can ride in there. And that is not the worst thing he does in the movie. I will say that much. He's yeah. But go on.
But yeah, so at a certain point, while he's trying to teach the class or like with all the kids, the little girl ends up kissing him on the lips and then gives him a little heart in a little package, a little envelope, and he's like, "You shouldn't do that. This isn't something that like we should do. We're like firmly establishing boundaries of what you can do." So later on, she ends up saying something out of the blue to one of the other kindergarten teachers that potentially implies Mads may have done something horrible, which we do not see, because obviously it's a weird kind of thing, especially watching it now. This movie came out in 2012. It is a curiosity. When I found out that was the premise of this, I became immediately uneasy. And I'm like, okay, how is this going to work out? And I think they do a really great job of firmly, like, establishing this is a very odd situation, as opposed to, like, this is, like, the constant reality kind of thing. But yeah, I think it's a fascinating little drama that also really does a great job, like, with these two movies of his that I've seen. I've only seen these two. He does such a fascinating job of building a kind of rapport between people that makes it feel truly lived in. Like you're popping in on like a situation that's like been around for like, at least a couple years in the hunt, or in this particular case, for a year within the hunt, but also with like another round. Like these guys who we hang out with, like they have been bros forever.
Yeah.
And it just feels like you're instantly a part of that friend group.
Yeah, he's very good at, I will say, kind of bringing you into a character, a group of characters' lives. I mean, the celebration is literally that. Like, you are just getting invited to this family and just kind of, like, finding things out about them and just kind of, like, it's slowly kind of unraveling what this family is. And even, like, Kursk, a movie I think is okay, it has a lot of great, like, character moments at the beginning, and it has a lot of great beats in there. But, yes, he's very good at kind of writing characters and doing all of that stuff.
As he, of course, did with Another Round, which let's just play the trailer now for Another Round.
Jeg ved ikke, om I har lyst til at starte aftenen med lidt champagne? Det lyder dejligt.
Jeg er i bil. Jeg skal bare have en dansk vand uden citrus.
Uden citrus, ja tak.
Ja.
Hæft, det er godt det her.
Ja, det er sgu synd, du er så fornuftig.
Men spørgsmålet er, hvad der i virkeligheden er fornuft. Der findes en norsk filosof. Han mener, at mennesket er født med en halv promille for lidt.
Altså, jeg må sige, jeg kunne da godt sådan bruge en halv promille sådan på daglig basis for at få lidt mere selvtillid.
Det har vi da alle sammen brug for. Det har du da også brug for.
Jeg synes, det er spændende.
Det gør jeg også. Så det er det, vi gør.
So Another Round came out in 2020, as we mentioned, September 24th, 2020 in Denmark.
Yeah, I know it was supposed to have its premiere at the Cannes Film Festival. It was
right, which
already
got
selected. Yes, got canceled. So sorry.
So good. No, don't apologize.
Everyone's turning the episode off now.
We got your download. It's fine.
Yes, but it was selected for the Cannes Film Festival, and then it eventually had its premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival.
Right, but the digital Toronto International Film Festival, yeah.
Right.
Which, side note, that was very interesting, where technically the only time I've ever been to Sundance was when they were doing, like, the Sundance in 2021. Kind of thing, during the pandemic. And it is fascinating how, like, I'm friends with a bunch of people who are, like, film cred, who were able to get access to stuff like the TIFF titles or Sundance or any of these other things in a way that has really disappeared since 2020. It's one of the few movie-related things, in particular 2020, that feel like it's been missing, like that sort of access. I wish that was like still more viable, because now film festivals will kind of put out screeners digitally, but only for like smaller things anyway. It's a shame that we can't have a bit more of that like accessibility anymore. Like that's how I was able to see Nomadland in like November of 2020. Was like through, it was I think it was the New York, I forgot which theater it is, but it was like one of the New York Arts Center, I believe.
Oh, like Lincoln Center?
The Lincoln Center, yes, God.
Yeah.
Oh, so cultured, clearly. But yeah, the Lincoln Center was putting out like those screeners. And yeah, I do kind of miss that element of it.
Yeah, it was also this weird thing in like 2020 where like we don't live in like New York or LA, and I feel like releases can often take a while to get to us. And one of the kind of, obviously I love movie theaters. I love movies being in theaters, but especially during this year, it was nice to see a lot of these movies, these kind of awards movies that typically like, would come out like months later for where we are. It was kind of great to see them like a bit earlier, just because they were put on like, VOD and streaming and stuff like that.
As another round was by the time of like early 2021 was when it first hit Hulu, where as of this recording it still remains. And basically, if you're unaware of this movie, which you might be because obviously the 2020 Oscars probably weren't, for just considering how little the Oscar movies are watched now. 2020 was, I guess, a particularly bad year for that. But with this movie, it follows these 4 teachers, Martin, Tommy, Peter, and Nikolai, who are all, in Copenhagen, teaching these kids. Some of the kids are a bit concerned about being able to like pass because of how strict sort of the grade guidelines are for the colleges they're going to attend. And it's, the stress is kind of building up for all these teachers as well, with like the various stuff with their home lives. Like our Martin, played by Mads Mikkelson, who I'm sure we're going to be talking about extensively.
Oh man,
in a bit, we go mad for Mads. Truly, he is like having a lot of issues with like opening up to other people, especially like his wife and his family. He's felt kind of distant, and so all of them, are kind of commiserating, talking at like Tommy's, I think it's Peter or Nikolai.
His 40th birthday.
Right, his 40th birthday. And at a certain point, he brings up, like, well, I've read this study that basically we should be at, like, a higher alcohol tolerance on a consistent level at 0.05%.
Right. Yeah, people are born, like, 0.05% under what they should be at. And that if you get to that level, you can kind of function better.
Right, based on this think piece that this guy read. This feels like totally like the worst kind of like, well, actually, studies show.
But it does feel like when you like kind of like meet up with someone, they're like, yeah, I read this study about how like, and they just tell you some like weird thing where you're like supposed to do, and you're like, what are you talking about?
But like a fun weird thing, not like a Q thing, which immediately just turns this into like, I'm leaving, goodbye. But yeah, so he's just like, well, yeah, we should try and maintain 0.05%, which is roughly 1 to 2, like bottles of, not bottles, 1 to 2, 1 to 2 glasses of wine, or just like a couple beers, basically. Like maintain that throughout the day, and you'll be like more energized, and you'll be looser, and you'll be able to like really connect with people. And so they all commit to that bit, and for a little bit, it kind of works out for them. They're kind of like doing some interesting things and stuff, but then shockingly, this might lead to alcoholism, which maybe we should even talk about this before we get into the movie. What's your relationship with alcohol?
I mean, it's a weird relationship, I will say. I have watched many people in my life, kind of just like family, who like drink a lot and have gotten just like absolutely hammered. I don't drink that often, to be honest. I don't drink alcohol that often. I'm a bit of a lightweight when it comes to alcohol. Like, I will have, like, half a beer, and I'm, like, kind of feeling it, Like,
Don't worry, folks. Whenever we have a beer after a movie, I always make sure Brian's good to drive, because he had, like, 2 sips, so I'm worried about him.
Yeah, but no, look, I think this movie gets into, like, a lot of the good, bad, and ugly stuff of alcohol, right? And like part of what I think is so interesting about this movie is that it is not a movie that is hitting you over the head of like, alcohol is bad, don't drink, it will ruin your life. Like, it's not a movie that's screaming that out at you.
It's not Leaving Las Vegas.
Right.
Yeah.
But because it works for them for a while, right? Like, they are like, he becomes a better teacher, and like you want like, honestly, like, as someone who like is recently in school, like, seems like a great professor when he is kind of drunk. Like, very fun. Yeah, I think that this movie gets into all of that stuff. And yeah, I don't have a dangerous relationship with alcohol myself, other than like, I drink it every once in a while and then I feel great. But yeah, I don't know. What about you?
Yeah, I have an interesting relationship with that where my parents were never really drinkers. But I had been around like dad's friends who were much more like liable to drink, and even alcohol was always this thing that like I was a good boy as like a teenager. So it was like I will abstain from any such things kind of deal until about college when I did take to drinking a bit more. I didn't have any ragers or anything. I'm not like these kids at the opening of another round necessarily where I'm like fucking around with people on subways and shit. But yeah, at the same time I've also kind of seen what you're talking about, like particularly with sort of friends who I maintain contact with from college. Some kind of like to drink a bit more than others, and the older you get, the more that can be a dangerous proposition. The most I ever got to like really drinking was during the pandemic, kind of like around this time, where there was just a certain point where I'm like, I have to like have something every single night. And it got to a point, especially I remember this one of only 2 times I've ever been blackout drunk was election night 2020. I think fairly.
Yeah,
I think it was very fair. But at the same time, I do hate that idea. Like whenever that's happened, like I said, twice in my life, I always feel weird about it because just like I've just completely forgotten everything about a certain chunk of time.
Oh, okay.
Right. A lot of my drunkest states, I still have like memories of like weird moments and shit like that. But just being completely blackout drunk really was just like a weird thing for me whenever it's happened. So it's like I don't want to ever get to that point again. So now, I'll get a 6-pack like, every 1-2 months. Just kind of like chill out with a beer when it's like been a really stressful day of work kind of deal. But yeah, I've really kind of like backtracked on it. And it was very interesting, especially watching this movie like shortly after that point.
I mean, as much as I kind of say like I am a bit of a lightweight, like it does not take a lot for me to get like buzzed or drunk or anything. I am very good at like holding my liquor, and I don't think I've only thrown up drunk like once, and I've never like blacked out or anything like that. When it comes to like watching this movie, at least, even though this is a movie where like it's not a alcohol good movie necessarily, as our guest Lily last week joked, like alcohol good, like no, it's not really that kind of movie necessarily, but like it does make alcohol seem very enticing, and like it gives you that feeling, especially if you haven't like had it in a while, of like that very first sip of alcohol you have and just like the buzz you get. This movie like really captures that in a way that I found very interesting. They also drink white wine in this, which is not my preference, by the way. I'm a red wine person personally.
I agree, concur with red wine.
Thank you. Finally, someone else.
Fuck that Chardonnay.
Yeah.
Merlot. That's right, Paul Giamatti in Sideways.
I don't know. This movie, I think, is very interesting when it comes to what it kind of has to say about alcohol, and how I don't think, and this is the thing I think Thomas Vinterberg is very good at, is not really hitting you over the head with the messaging of the movie. He sort of just lays it out for you, which is kind of the thing I remember about like The Hunt, whereas like obviously that movie has a lot of messages going on, but I don't think it's very explicit about it necessarily, and more it is kind of just depicting what this is like for these people.
It's not very cut and dry. It just kind of tries to examine the situation for what it is, which I do find fascinating, especially with like between The Hunt and this. I think he does such a great job of making movies that, not to sound too pretentious, but do feel just like life. You're really engrossed in the situation. And like I said, there's that point when they're talking about the whole, keeping yourself at 0.05%. I love the fact that just does feel like a real sort of friendship back and forth dinner conversation, where there's like, that's bullshit. I don't know, man. He has all the scientific research, and I think it makes sense. And, how they kind of grow to realize, like, you know what? Yeah, fuck it. We're very sad and very middle-aged. Let's do it.
Well, that scene where like they're all at the dinner is so great because of all that stuff, but also like the Mads in that scene is so great because he's the only one like not drinking. He's like, I'm driving, I'm just gonna have a soda, like it's fine. And then they keep like bringing out like, they have like a white wine, and then they have like a champagne and like a red wine and stuff, and like he has like the 2 glasses, and he's like, we'll get to Mads in like 1 second, but like his like look where he starts like his eyes start watering, and he's just like thinking about just all of just his life and just his state in life, and he just downs like 3 like glasses of wine in like a minute. Yeah, I mean, it is like that thing I was talking about earlier of just like that, just having alcohol when you haven't had it in a while, and you're just like almost like this, like fuck it, like just drinking, like kind of thing. But should we get to Mads? Should we talk about Mads for a minute? Mads Corner.
Let's do it. So, I'm curious what your first Mads is, because I think I have a more traditional one, which is Casino Royale.
I don't think that was the first time I ever saw him, to be honest.
Okay.
The first time I ever saw him, I think, might have been maybe Rogue One and like Doctor Strange, right? Because those are the kind of the same year, 2016.
Yes.
So I think I saw him in those, and then of course, yeah, Casino Royale, which I think he's one of the best Bond villains ever. I would say. Would you agree with that?
I mean, it's especially interesting considering that with that movie, they do kind of like pull the rug from under you with him,
Right.
Because he dies fairly early into the movie by like comparison to what you would. Or no, wait, did he get murdered in Quantum of Solace?
No, he dies in. I think he dies in Casino Royale.
Okay. Right.
Well, now I want to fact check myself.
I have his phone pulled up. He doesn't have a credit for Quantum of Solace, so I'm gonna say it's Casino Royale.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how he dies though in Casino Royale.
I mean, he just gets like kind of shot. Like,
oh right, well it's during the torture scene, right? And like someone comes in and like shoots him.
yes, right.
Okay, yes, I remember now. Which I mean,
Right. But that ball torture you're talking about, though, that's like the
course.
big thing for like that makes him work so well. Where it's just like, oh, I'm gonna like torture Bond, but not in the there's no laser coming up to his crotch. Like, no, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. It's like, I'm gonna fucking whip you in the balls.
he's just like the simplest tortures are often the most effective or something like
Yes.
that, and it's just like, I mean, there's a thing about him where he is so hot, I must say, like incredibly handsome, and yet, and I think this is because I love Scandinavian people, but just because he's Danish, he's very menacing looking, and he's very scary, and he can really he's a great villain. I think he's a pretty good villain in Doctor Strange. I think he's very good in Dial of Destiny, which I don't really love that much, but I think he's very good in it.
He's got perfect casting for that. I mean, even I'll say, we don't like to talk about this franchise, but he's easily the best Grindelwald as Grindelwald performance.
I was gonna. I haven't seen The Secrets of Dumbledore yet. I don't know. I
Oh,
don't know
what?
his
No one?
secrets.
You didn't see that? Shocking. Along with a lot of other people who didn't see it. But yeah, I mean, I remember still the second time it would have probably been when of course, we haven't mentioned it yet, but fucking Hannibal. The first time
Oh my gosh, of
I ever
course,
saw
actually, yeah.
Hannibal was like the first time I like had seen him, I think post Casino Royale, and I was like, oh wow, this guy is somehow more menacing without like the weird like eye that has like the scar on it and everything. The fascinating thing about Hannibal was I still remember around that time, and I was along with the chorus of just like, why are we doing a fucking Hannibal TV show? This feels like a dumb idea.
It's
This
the
was
reason I
very
never
early in
watched
sort
it
of
for
the
years.
golden age of television kind of Renaissance thing. It truly blew me away. And I still think like a very fascinating sort of way of taking such familiar material and truly making it feel whole and unique.
Yeah, and it's kind of the perfect marriage of him being like incredibly charming and incredibly handsome, and also there is just that menace to him, and like he is, I don't know how he does this, but he like, especially in Hannibal, like really dials it up or down, like how menacing he is versus how like much you're just kind of like charmed by this guy. And of course we haven't mentioned what I'm sure is his most famous credit, which is the Rihanna "Bitch Better Have My Money" music video, which
True.
of course,
Very true.
we all remember. Have you heard the quote that he said about why he did that music video?
Refresh my memory on it.
It was so his like daughters, I believe, like he had told them about being in this Rihanna music video, and they like yelled at him like, "You fucking idiot! Like, do it! What are you doing? It's Rihanna!" And there's this really great interview around the time of like Rogue One where like it's him and Ben Mendelsohn doing like the interview junket kind of thing, and
Right.
someone like asked Ben Mendelsohn like, "Oh, like how jealous are you that Mads was in Rihanna's like 'Bitch Better Have My Money' music video?" And Ben's like, "Oh, I didn't know." And Mads is just like, "Yeah." And he has this like really satisfied grin on his face, and he goes like, "I was the bitch." Just
What I find so fascinating about him is that he is very handsome, like you mentioned earlier. He's very hot, but also he feels very uniquely hot. Mads just feels like he came from a different fucking universe, and he arrived here. Just happened to land in, in the Danish country. And, it's fascinating, especially, like, how, like, handsome and unsettling he can be, but also how even funny he could be. Like, by doing nothing. Like, on Hannibal, there's so many points where they just do the cheeky thing of, like, oh, I'm having friends over for dinner. And he would just look. And he's just like, I'm so satisfied with this fucking bit I just did. And that's the thing. He has, like, I think it's only, like, his unique face could kind of, like, display all that. As well as it does.
I mean, what a face. Like, he's a really wonderful actor. And, like, I feel like, again, like, he is very striking looking. And I think that like a lot of people kind of like you see him once and you're just like, oh, I know this guy. Like he's very distinctive looking, and I think a lot of people, they know of him from his like menacing side or of like, him being Hannibal and being like terrifying or whatever, or from the masterpiece video game Death Stranding, which he's great in, I think, or of course you've seen Hideo Kojima tweet like 5 million times a day pictures of him or whatever. But what I love so much about his performance in Another Round, which might be my favorite lead performance of 2020, is that like there's not a lot of him being scary or charming necessarily. Like it is like this character is a bit, I say pathetic, but only because like he is very dejected, he's very like disinterested in his like work, he's very depressed and like down and whatever, and it's a very restrained performance in a lot of ways, and it's a very great just dramatic performance, which like again, like Dial of Destiny, he's great. I'm sure he's probably the best part of Secrets of Dumbledore, but again, that feels like the movies are more kind of using his persona that he's been putting out there for years, and it's really great when he gets to work with like Vinterberg, who he's like worked with before, of course, like on something like this where he gets to flex a bit more of his dramatic muscles, which is always great to see.
What I think is what's interesting is, like, that's the guy that we get at least at the very beginning of this movie. And then he almost has a sort of, like, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde transformation over the course of this movie. With, like, the various different personas. I think this is, like, the best showcase, I think, for every single flavor of Mads. Really. It's a true Mads smorgasbord, if you will. And... Yeah, because, like, he gets to be, like you mentioned, like, so downtrodden. That scene where he's crying at the dinner table, I agree. It's, like, such a beautiful... And it's, like, all one shot, basically, of him, like, really tearing up. Yeah. But then, later on, when... Like, right after that scene, I think, is when, like, they're all drunkenly dancing around the first time. And he's doing that weird, like, sidewalk where he's kind of flossing.
Oh, my
God. Or whatever.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
Yeah. And, like, and when he kind of, like... when he drinks and starts like teaching, and he kind of like really opens up when he's doing the whole like who of these three people would you vote for, and he kind of like is doing that whole thing. Yeah, he's just so charming, and you're just like so like entranced by this guy because he is so compelling, and you just want to like listen to him and watch him like do whatever.
He almost convinces you that Winston Churchill was a cool dude.
Yes. Yeah,
as we of course saw in The Darkest Hour, or as I prefer to call it, Big Mama's House 4, Churchill's in Session. Maybe the funniest thing I've ever come up with. I don't see that likely. That'll be on my tombstone.
Yeah, and like, and he does get like a couple of scenes where he is a bit scary, like when he's like at the dinner table with his like wife, when he like throws all the glasses and the dishes and everything. Like that's a scene where I'm just like, oh right, like he can really like go, big and like scary if he wants to, if he needs to.
And a big thing with this movie, for all the performers here, but I would say in particular Mads, drunk acting is infamously hard to nail. There are so many times where you watch somebody act drunk in a movie or a TV show and it's like, what the hell is this? Like, the weird thing where Nicolas Cage won his Oscar for Leaving Las Vegas, which I referenced earlier, and his whole thing was like, oh, I just taped myself drunk and then did that, which you can imagine Nicolas Cage doing Nicolas Cage drunk is not quite like everybody else. Perhaps.
What? Are you saying
No.
Nicolas Cage is not like most other people?
No. Very normal, chill dude. So it's hard to really like get drunk acting right, but I think what Mads does so well, and everybody else in this cast, like I said, does so well, is truly convey like the whole you're drunk but you're trying to act sober thing. Like that's like another infinitesimal hard version of drunk. And they all do it so beautifully in this movie.
Well, and like obviously like they're drunk for a lot of the movie, but it's not even that they are drunk. It's that kind of thing of like you're buzzed.
Yes.
You're kind of in between buzzed and drunk. And that's a very like that's so difficult to like act, I assume. And Mads, especially during all those scenes where he's like teaching, like all the teachers, of course, like when they're all kind of like in their mojo and whatever, it's such a great representation of that, like that zone of like in between buzzed and drunk where you're just like very loose, but not like blabbering and like, you know, slurring and everything. It is one of the things that makes these performances, I think, so great and so like difficult and interesting to kind of look at in this movie.
Yeah. Which I think that's a solid transition. Like, who is your favorite of the other three guys? I'll shout out their names. So we mentioned Thomas Bo Larsen, and Magnus Melange, but also Lars Ranth as Peter. I think the four of them are so phenomenal. But who would you say is your favorite of the supporting sort of ensemble?
Oh man, I like Tommy. Mainly because I was watching this and I was like, oh, it's the guy from The Celebration. But like, I think he has, obviously, like, where his plotline goes is very upsetting and very, like, one of the more kind of, like, heartbreaking things about the movie and kind of thematically, of course. But I love just seeing him, like, with the kid, like, with the Specs, as they call him. Like, just seeing their, like, interactions, just the way that he's kind of, like, he's clearly drunk, so he's like, you know, kind of like very buddy with him, but like there is kind of a genuine like caring there for him. Like he's really kind of trying to look out for him. And then when like he scores the goal and like it's such a great like moment. But also I just like him because I think he's the most, obviously for where he ends up, of course, but like his is the most depressing. But who's your MVP?
I gotta say for me, it's Magnus Melange. I think because like he has the particular kind of thing where we obviously what you're talking about with Bo Larsen is more kind of like the tragic side of this, versus Nikolai as a character gets the best example of sort of like the most embarrassing, I think, kind of downfall.
Yeah.
With like him peeing in that bed, which is such a good payoff to the whole, like, earlier on, the kids, like, he keeps saying, like, oh, they pee all over my bed. The one kid just, like, sleeping on top of him on the couch, which is, like, such a good scene, especially of, like, an awkward father-son moment where it's just, like, he screams, and it's like, no, you're gonna wake up everybody. What are you doing? He's like, and then by the time he actually pees in the bed, it is truly, like, the most pathetic, like, oh, man, this is, like, the least dignified anyone's looked here.
He's really great. I will say I love that he's the one treating it like it's this like experiment, the scientific method, like he's typing it all out and everything.
By the way, I love how this movie uses typing here, where it's just its intertitles is like almost feels like a silent movie thing. Like, oh my god, why don't we just do this more often? Not just like bubbled up text messages or whatever. Do this.
Yeah, what you've gotten like that scene where like he pees in the bed and like him and his wife have that like argument. You read like the synopsis for this movie of like, oh, it's these four guys who are staying at like a low alcohol level, you know, they're drinking whatever, and you're like, oh, that sounds kind of like interesting, kind of fun, whatever, like. And before I had seen this movie, I thought like, oh, this is going to be a movie that kind of like hammers down that message of like alcohol is bad and it's going to like ruin their lives, whatever, etc. And it's not necessarily that, but I think what it reveals is like, yes, it's a movie about these four guys like doing this fun, dumb experiment that sounds kind of like you hear about it for the first time and you're like, oh, that sounds interesting. But it very quickly, I think, reveals itself to be a movie about toxic masculinity and these four guys who are using this as like this almost like escape to not acknowledge like their personal lives and not wanting to engage in their everyday lives with their families and their jobs and all that stuff.
As in a sober state to any degree.
Right, and I think that scene really like is great at that, at showing like the very ugly side of that, where like they have that just massive argument, and he's just left like laying on the ground.
But we should also shout out Lars as Peter, who I think especially, he's the one that feels the most like a teacher I would have had, for sure. Because,
Right.
especially like his relationship with his sort of, his mentorship of that one kid, who's really like trying to
Sebastian.
take the test. Yeah, Sebastian, yes. Which I love how the kids, they start our movie. There are opening sequences, them like fucking around, getting drunk. Which I guess I wasn't aware really of like the sort of Copenhagen's policy on a high schooler can drink freely until it becomes too much of a problem.
Yeah, I looked up the age of drinking in Denmark, and I think it's like it was 16 for like buying it in a shop and 18 for going to a bar or like a restaurant. Any Danish people out there, please correct me, but that's what Google
Yes, our
told me.
Danish listeners, please. That kinship, I think, feels like really authentic, and especially the whole fact that the twist of this, like when I had forgotten about the subplot basically before I rewatched it, and I was kind of worried, like, oh wait, is this going to be like another tragic angle I forgot about, like this kid's gonna get sloshed and like ruin his future or whatever, and no, he had like a couple sips to steady his nerves, and then he was able to do his fucking exam well.
This is the thing about this movie, I think, which is like it is a movie very much about like, yeah, alcohol can help, like it does, like, you know, like not to, you know, but it helps them, like it genuinely does, like they are better teachers, they're better like in their personal lives and everything, and yet like there is that angle of like, but it will also like, if you continue, it not only will it lead to like alcoholism, but it will just lead to everyone around you just kind of hating you and like being kind of repelled by you because you're fucking drunk all the time.
Right, I think it's a movie. It's a very big proponent of moderation, which is like, you know, just the healthy way of like, you can still drink on occasion, or like on a night where you don't have any responsibilities, anything like that. You can just like chill out and have a drink. Just all the difference in the world between like that kind of moderation and like the reliance on it. Like where it really is a movie about like that specific angle of addiction that is just like, it's a habit thing. That it's like you just keep up a certain thing, especially that moment where they switch over from like, you know what, maybe we should go a bit higher than 0.05. Like that's the moment where it becomes like, oh, now it's just alcoholism. Really.
Right. They even like, I mean, I think at some point when they're in like the office, like where they're all like meeting, and they're like, are we alcoholics? And the guy's like, no, we're not alcoholics because we choose when we're drinking.
Right.
Alcoholics like, you know, can't like help themselves, that kind of thing, which is what they say.
Total alcohol logic, yes.
But but like, yes, but like where it leads up to, where it's that like the really bad night where they go out and they're at the bar, and like they're like, Mads is like on top of the bar and like falls onto the crowd and everything, like that is just like the part where it's like, oh, these guys are just, they're just drunks, like they're just really drunk guys who,
Yeah.
you know. But I do love the kind of angle of this movie of just having the school kids, obviously like the beginning is them like drinking and like tying the, they tie the cop to the bar, which is kind of funny actually. and I don't know how much of this is like true or whatever, but there's that line that his wife says, Annika, who's like, you know, everyone in this country drinks like so much, right? And like that idea of like alcohol being so pervasive and being passed on to like the next generation almost, which is like just a bit like scary, kind of looking at the more tragic elements of this movie. But also I love just the kind of contrast where it's these kids who are very excited about like their future, they're excited to go to college, they're excited to party and drink or whatever, and then these like, you know, guys in their 40s who are past all of that stuff, and they're just like, and they, you know, kind of yearn for that feeling, but they can't have it. And also they're like, you know, they're just, you know, they're unable to cope with their personal lives. And yeah, I don't know, all those elements I think are just so fascinating to me, and the way that that this movie handles all of them.
Real shame when you can't cope in Copenhagen.
Boo.
Tip waitresses, trivial, etc., etc. But yeah, it is interesting, especially like, even, you know, we're talking about this film from Denmark, but we obviously live in the United States, where alcohol is still extremely pervasive in its own right. It's weird to think that, like, only a couple years before, like, I was born, we had, like, a Spuds McKenzie. Which, are you aware of what this is?
I've heard of it, but I have no idea what that is.
It was the Bud Light sponsor that was literally just, like, one of those bull terriers that is just dressed up with, like, sunglasses and, like, a party button-down, like, Hawaiian shirt. And he was the life of the party, Spuds McKenzie.
Yeah, I love his shirt. I'm gonna be honest.
Makes you want a Bud Light, doesn't it?
It does not. Nothing on this earth could make me want a Bud Light.
That was a test. You passed. Truly, I appreciate that.
I have water right next to me.
Yep. But yeah, this was like a character who, like, obviously was like, oh no, hey, we haven't been hanging around bikini babes or whatever. This is an adult drink, but it's like, but also you're trying to get kids into it. Because it's a cute dog who's selling beer. They're inherently going to be attracted to that.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that this movie gets, which is kind of, you know, a universal kind of thing, is especially like that scene I mentioned at the bar later on where it's like a really messy night. It really kind of reminded me of my absolute nightmare, which is drunk people at a bar. Just being around them, like just being around super drunk people like at a restaurant or a bar or something is just my nightmare. Because like just the way that they're acting, where it's just like obviously like they just have no filter and are just not like, just don't give a shit about anything. And it's just one of those things that I'm just like, oh my god, it's like you just
You know, I'm not the most social person either, but at the same time, I like a fun night at a bar. You know,
No, sure,
I think there can be like a fun to that, but I agree with you when it's like just overcrowded. Like, I'll just say this much: one of the times I have gotten the most drunk was when I was at FSU. Go Noles! And when I went there the night that we won the championship in 2013, which is one of the most beautiful displays I've ever seen of just a wide variety of drunks. Like, truly, and we all were there, and we all were very happy and exhaustive. People were literally going into, like, the middle of the highway and, like, high-fiving in, like, the median as people were stopped. Like, it was, like, a magical night of all of us being all different shades of fucking blasted. And I think that there's something to that.
But what you're describing though is like the ending of the movie, which is very celebratory and almost like is very cathartic. But like that night is just kind of like my nightmare of just like drunk people who are just far too drunk and have had way too much and are just like, you know, being like way too friendly and just like that kind of thing.
I had nights like that as well. Sure. Right, especially in college, I had so many nights like that were fucking awful. That's the thing, is this movie I think does a really great job of displaying like what alcohol can really be, which is just like it's this tool, and how often you use it will very much affect how, you know, your night will go. I think one of the better scenes that displays this is when Thomas Bo Larsen comes back after they agree to stop drinking, and like. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about with, like, the acting. Like, that also, Mads has a moment like that leads to a hilarious pratfall at the end of it. Hits the wall. But, yeah, just, like, those two scenes do such a great job of displaying, like, how that can be a funny situation or, like, the most, like, awkward and upsetting scene possible.
Yeah. That scene feels like it goes on for so long, too.
Yep.
Of just, like, him walking in the room and just like stumbling everywhere. Yeah.
Can I just also say about Thomas Bo Larsen, the weird thing about seeing The Hunt and this movie one day after the other, it's so weird seeing him without that beard from The Hunt.
Oh, he has a beard in I haven't seen The Hunt in so long.
He has an amazing facial hair where it feels like, I'm not sure if it's fake or the realest hair I've ever seen. Where it's just like that.
Oh, right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating facial hair.
It is. I kind of like the look, though. Just, like, the longer hair, beard. Like, he looks good.
No, I love it. Which is why he almost was, like, unrecognizable to me when I first saw him again in another round.
Yeah, I mean, I like seeing him in this and, like, the celebration where he's, like, much, much younger is, like, he looks very similar in another round as he does in the celebration. Like, he's just, like, much older. And, I had forgotten he was in The Hunt. That's, interesting.
But that guy, I think, is, like, so stellar in that scene I'm mentioning. And just like throughout the movie, like there's a great scene also that him and Mads share that feels like one of the truest examples of like situations I've just been in where it's like you're around somebody who has had issues with drinking and then they offer you a drink and you're like, let's not do it, buddy. Let's stop that. Like I've had moments like that where you're just like, you know what, hey, we don't have to be drunk right now. You know? We can just like be like on each other's level. And he's like, yeah. Like I love that too, that he's so agreeable. Just like, yeah, you're right.
Right. The Mads is like, maybe we shouldn't do that. And he's like, no, yes, of course. Like, of course we shouldn't do that. Like, of course, yeah. Like, yeah. And just his whole thing of like his kind of plot line, I guess, which is a bit of, at least this is the way I read it, of like it's how Mads's character could end up, right? Because he's like divorced and he's like kind of lonely and just kind of, you know, not very happy and everything. And it's kind of where Mads' character's heading. At least you can kind of see that, which I just love their kind of like last scene together where he's like, I'm rooting for you guys, and like he's like, and also he's like, you don't want this, which is like such a devastating line, I think.
The "you don't want this" in particular like took me aback, honestly, when I watched it this time. That real kind of like awkwardness there, I think just it's what what we were talking about earlier, of just like Vinterberg truly getting you immersed in this situation, especially for a movie that has very odd tonal shifts, especially for like a Western audience, where like if you're watching this, like it truly does like go from, oh, it's like a sad drama to this is a hilarious comedy where these guys just being silly. The scene where they dance to like the sissy strut, that like jazz bit where they're in the house, is like so raucous and charming, and you're like, these bros rule. I want to be bros
Dudes
with
rock.
these guys. Dudes rock. Exactly.
This is a dude's rock movie.
It is a dude's rock movie, but it's also at the same time a dude's hit rock bottom movie.
Right, of course.
Which I think
it is also
right.
Dudes sometimes don't rock? What?
Right, that dude's rock is much like drinking, like it's an aesthetic, it's a specific thing, but like you got to do it right or else dudes don't end up rocking. That's the real twist of dude's rock.
I mean, I think that's also the scene where like they're kind of discussing like, let's go one step like further. Like I think it's like it's from point like 7, I think is what they're at, to like 1.2 or something like insane like that. And that's the scene where Mads is like, I'm out. Like I have to get back to my, because it's after him and his like family have gone on the canoe trip, which is so lovely and it's such a like
wonderful,
like beautiful, especially like a necessary sex scene.
That's exactly what but like when I was watching this, I immediately just thought of like that whole dumb sex scene argument, because like it's not really titillating, it's just, it is sensual and it's very like sweet and heartwarming by the end of it, where it's just shout out Maria Bonevi, very underrated I think for this movie.
Yes, she's really great.
She really conveys, like, particularly in that moment where she's like crying and she just mentions like, it's because I've missed you.
I've missed you. Yeah, it's been a long time, I think is like another thing she says.
Right, it's been a long time since I've like really engaged with you. You get a true sense that she's a woman who has felt abandoned in her marriage. And then with like moments like that, or, you know, even like the restaurant scene, which is so fucking brutal, you get a full sense of like, she's just been through so much, even if like all that's happened to her is like her husband's been distant. Like, that really, truly affects her in a way that feels very grounded and sad.
Yeah. And also, I mean, also, like, with Nikolai's wife, rewatching this movie, I really got a sense of just, like, oh my god, she has to deal with, like, not just, like, her husband, like, being whatever. Like, I like that he is not, like, a bad husband in the sense of, like, she's like, oh, I have to, like, remember to get the fresh cod. And he's like, yep, getting the fresh cod. And, like, he's not like, shut up or whatever, you know. He's like, it's not that their relationship is like awful, but it is like,
she's not like a nag and it's like, am I right?
Sure. Right.
Yeah.
But I like the way that you can tell like she like is taking care of what, like 3 kids is what they have. Like they have 2 toddlers and a baby, and like you can tell just like, oh, she's had to like really deal with the household while he's been like, you know, working and dealing with his whatever bullshit like he has to go
hanging out with his bros.
Yeah, hanging out with the boys.
I don't think she would say the dude's rock in this case.
No. But Yeah, I mean, yeah, she's also great in this movie.
Yeah, their home lives feel very authentic to me. Where,
Yeah.
like, even sort of I don't know who plays his kids, but that one particularly when his son, like, comes across Mads after he's, like, fucking fallen over on the bike, and he has to, like, drag him back home. Like, this was a great movie that, like, displays, like, because obviously with, like, drunk acting and sort of, like, when movies are about alcohol, it tends to be like Nicolas Cage in Leaving Las Vegas, where it's very performative. It's very much about, like, the misery of drinking versus, like, capturing instead, like, a much more relatable kind of low state makes it a lot. That's a way better PSA against drinking to me than, like, any, like, oh, you're gonna, like, always fucking, like, crash your car if you have one sip of alcohol before you drive.
Exactly.
Anything like that. Right. Versus this is like, I don't know, you're gonna look like a fucking idiot. And everyone's gonna know you're an idiot. And that's, like,
And
so awful.
and like he really captures in that scene where he like his son like drags him to their house. Like, this is gonna sound like I'm bragging here, but like I don't really get hungover when I drink. Like, to be honest, like I just don't really, doesn't happen to me. I get like a mild headache and then I just like have like I eat something and I'm fine. But like him in that like the very few times I've been like hungover like once or twice where I had like a lot to drink, and he captures like one like that thing of like you wake up and you're still kind of drunk a bit, and like that's when him and his wife have that really big argument where he like throws like the dishes, I believe, but also just how like exhausted and like drained of like life he is after drinking, where he just looks dead, and like it just really captures that like really well to me.
That factor where it's embarrassing to be as drunk as you are, especially when, like, you're a youth still, Bryan, in terms of the hangovers. Get ready. That happens a lot more as you get even a little bit older. I don't know who I'm talking about, but when these guys are all like, what, their median age is like 42, like
Something like that.
they're all just like, when you get that drunk at that age, this isn't charming
Sure.
at all.
Right
now.
Right. Well, because we see like, you know, with the kids, like we like it's very fun, and it's like, you know, a party, it's very like jovial and everything, and yeah, having that contrasted with like these guys is such a great like it's a great element of this movie, and I think it's Vinterberg. Like, he does all that stuff really well. Like, speaking of just contrast, like Kursk is a movie that has a really great like contrasting beginning and end scenes that really like fit like bookend well together, and yeah, he's just really great at that kind of stuff, and I love it. I just remembered the scene. This is when they're on their kind of like final like bender, when they're in the grocery store. Which is one of the most just like, oh my god, what are you doing? Like, scenes where they're like looking for the cod, and they're just like knocking everything over. Like, that also is just what a nightmare to have to like deal with those people.
But, you know, we're kind of dancing around, Bryan. Like, your background right now is a shot from the ending. We want to probably talk about that extensively. So before we get to that, any other stuff about another round we haven't really talked about you want to shout out?
Well, this is to do not with the movie itself, but with the title, which it's called Another Round. The original title in Danish is druk, which I looked it up, and is a term in Denmark that means binge drinking, which I just think that's a great title. I'm really I'm becoming more interested in like looking up what the original title of movies were in like their native land, but. No, yeah, I don't know. What about you? You got anything else besides the ending?
Well, I mean, we should probably talk about like one element of this movie we haven't really talked about is kind of what unfortunately happened during the production of it. Vinterberg.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're unaware, Thomas Vinterberg had a daughter named Ida who was slated to play Mikkelson's daughter in the movie, which that got changed to two boys. Because 4 days into filming, Ida was tragically killed in a car accident at like 19. So obviously that really affected the movie, and kind of it became more of like a life-affirming thing by the end of it. And I think that's interesting, especially considering like kind of this mixed bag we're talking about. I didn't know that backstory going into Another Round the first time, but seeing it again, knowing that, like that actual production element of it, which I don't think I found until around the time of the Oscars. It feels a lot more like a movie about somebody kind of mourning, truly. Not just like an actual person, but just like life in general at this point.
Yeah, I think the kind of, not twist, but the kind of turn this movie takes of like, even for like the first 2/3, or like you said, like it's a balance of like, this is fun, this is jovial, but also you're getting a real sense of like these guys being very depressed and very like, you know, dejected.
And wanting to shut out life around them.
Right. And like, but the kind of turn that this takes in like the last act of like really hammering like the tragedy and the kind of the more upsetting elements of the movie is, yeah, it's very palpable. And I remember when he won the Oscar, he gave like a really, really beautiful speech, like about like mentioning his daughter and everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that element is very much there, especially in that last act, and it doesn't feel like it is like a last minute correction, like in the script or anything like that. It feels like a very natural progression of like where this is going and what the movie is trying to say, and it is weirdly life affirming, even though it is still a very depressing movie about like sad boys.
Right. No, exactly. I think, yeah, especially all the stuff with the kids. Like, I think I love all of the kid actors. Not kid. They're all like, what, 17, 18,
Like teenagers,
right?
yeah.
Right. They're all like late teenagers. And, you know, the whole thing is like this is taking place over the course of like the post-Christmas through like graduation in May.
Yeah.
Kind of period. And it does such an interesting job of like conveying, you know, that these kids are like, you know, interacting with these adults and they feel like, you know, initially very distant, then become like the role models almost after a certain point. And then like all this stuff with Larson dying, which we haven't really mentioned. But, you know, that's so beautifully done too, with like him like taking his dog out to the pier and getting on the boat, putting on the life jacket.
He like starts to put it on, and then like at a certain point you can see him just go like, fuck it, and just like throws it on the ground.
Yeah.
And I love the way it's handled of like, we don't see his death, we don't see his like body or anything, we just see like him on the boat and then cut back to it, and then it's just the dog on the boat. And it's so, yeah, it's so tragic, and yet it doesn't feel like it is doing the thing that you can feel a lesser movie do, of like making it this like big dramatic moment or whatever, this big tragic moment where one of the characters dies. It's very like life. It doesn't really try to dramatize it in any way, I don't think. But yeah, I mean, and I love one of the, I just thought about this, but like one of the scenes earlier where they're like on one of their like benders at night, and they're like talking about like teaching, and they're like, oh well, these kids they'll remember us like when they leave, and then another one's just like, no, they'll forget us like the moment they walk out of those doors. And then like the shot just like holds on them for just sitting there for a minute. I don't know. I mean, I guess this is us getting into a bit of the ending here, but like the ending is kind of not that really. Like it is this like coming together moment of like the teachers and the students having like this really like this like celebration, this like party, which is so great. The ending of this movie, this kind of last like scene or two, might be one of my favorite I've seen in like years. Like even like I had thought about it like so often, like in the past couple of years after I saw it, and it's just
firmly established itself as like one of the great endings of the 2020s, very early in that run.
Yes,
for sure. Yes,
and just, I mean, the song, like the "What a Life" song, which is not a song. I don't think it's made for this movie, but the way it's used in this movie, I think is really, really perfect. It's a perfect song because it is like this perfect like Euro pop song that you would absolutely like expect these like teenagers to be listening to. And like if you actually listen to the song, it is a very like modern song with all these like weird like hip hop like ad libs and whatever. And it's like kind of trashy, like it's a trashy pop song, but it is so much fun, and it really captures like the essence of like that final scene, I think.
If you had told me going into another round that like it would be this interesting complex meditation on humans' relationship to alcohol, and then also told me it ends like the ending of Caddyshack, I would have scoffed at you. But that's kind of what I love about this ending, is that it's just like, after, like, we had like our laughs, we had our tears, we went through so much after all this, and just the buildup of it, where it's like, after obviously the funeral, when they go to like the one restaurant, they're like, nah, fuck, let's go to this other place that's like over by the pier. And they go there and they have like a really, like, what looks like a great lunch, truly. Like a wonderful, like, sunny afternoon lunch. And then those kids come in those party buses. And then they see, and I love the fact that the moment they see like Mads and all them, they're just like, oh shit!
Yeah.
You're all here! And then, yeah, just all the dancing. So much great. Mads in particular, his whole thing. Like, every move, I'm just like, this is done perfectly. You're the only person who could look this great doing this dumb dancing.
Like, the dancing is so, like, silly and, like, dumb. And it's very much like, if I saw, like, I don't know, my uncle, like, dancing like that, it would be like, oh, God, like, can we get out of here? Like, but because it's Mads Mikkelson, who is just one of our great actors, I think, it is so incredible. And it's such a great, like, physical, like, performance there, where he's just really, like, letting everything loose. And we should also kind of mention, like, this is cut in between, like, we talked about, like, the like lunch scene he has with his wife. They're kind of separated at that point, and then right before the kind of dance sequence, they're kind of texting, which that also is great. Like, the way that they're handling the text.
That's part of the great buildup of all this. Yeah, this is all going on, and once again, the intertitles, and like Mads looking down, intertitle. Mads kind of like smiling a bit more, like he kind of grinches his way to a giant smile. Just particularly when it's just like, I miss you too, a lot. The a lot is like so perfect. It's just that igniting Mads into like his dance is like perfect. One of the great sort of cinematic text chains.
Yeah, I think this whole ending just feels so cathartic. Like, I feel like we often think of cathartic endings as like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like the ending of Midsummer is a very popular one from like the past few years, where it's a very cathartic ending, but it's very violent. And I feel like a lot of endings people view cathartic are very like violent endings, where like someone gets their revenge or whatever. But this just feels like a cathartic ending in that it is like someone really like just letting loose. It captures so much in like in just a dance, right? Like, it reminds me of like the ending of Claire Denis' Beau Travail, which has a great dancing ending. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but like it's a incredible like person dances at the end.
I think I've seen this clip. I have just not seen this whole movie.
Oh, sure, yeah. But yeah, I what an ending.
And especially down to like your background is really the freeze frame ending. This movie makes a freeze frame ending work, something that is often parodied about like 80s comedies and shit, where it's just like high five, then we go to the credits and everything of it. But it's just it does it so well. Like I said, so much of this feels like it would be the ending of like a very crass American comedy. But then like as it's done here, it's like we mentioned, it's like very life affirming, it's very jovial. Even just like how the other guys are dancing, where they're dancing more like dads. Kind of deal, like behind Mikkelson. It's like so wonderful in the contrast. And I love the fact that when we see them initially, like at this funeral, they all do just look like healthier than they did previously. They don't look as like sluggish and bloated. And it feels just like, yeah, we've really cleaned ourselves up, so now we can fucking just have fun using alcohol as like a solid, social lubricant, as it should be used.
I don't know, when Mads just kind of like gets into it, a great just like, fuck it, like great, just like release ending. And just like the way, I don't know, the way it's shot is so great too, where it's all these like handheld camera. It's this handheld camera that's just going like in between like people and like around people. It's
free floating kind of thing. And you feel like you're dancing with Mads and his friends. And you know what? Who wouldn't amongst us want to do such a thing?
Absolutely. I mean, God, I'm watching it again right now as we speak, and just like the way he jumps over the bench and just like lands there is so incredible. And I just look, he this is a really great performance for all the things that we've mentioned. Of like, it's a very dramatic performance, it's a very like nuanced performance. But this just ending of just it is a great showcase for Mads Mikkelson, and just him being incredibly compelling and incredibly just like, I imagine if someone has like watched this movie and did not know about Mads Mikkelsen, like you would fall in love with him like forever, because this ending is just so incredible, and he gives like his all in this ending. Yeah, I also I love the shot where like they're like pouring champagne on him, and he's like running through the champagne.
Yes.
as it's like pouring on him, it's just so incredible.
What would you say is your favorite specific dance move that he does in this ending?
Oh man, I love all. I love all of it. I don't know. Let me
For
rewind
me-
it one more time. Yeah, you go.
I mean, for me, it's the bit where he's like kind of moving with his drink in his hand like this,
That might be
back
my
and forth
one, yeah.
with his legs, especially because like that feels the most like, you know, that kind of thing. Like I've gotten to that kind of drunk a point where I feel like my limbs are a bit looser and longer
Yes,
and they
yes.
actually are, and it's just like, and he just pulls it off so fucking well. Like a move anyone else would look dumb doing, like that, or the bit where he like claps his hands and then shimmies, like yeah, it's so good.
The thing, and a thing about it I love about this like dance sequence at the end is how much it feels very loose, right? And obviously it's him kind of drunk acting a bit, but like there's such an effortless quality to this like dancing that I think like I don't know, I feel like another actor would try to make it more like pop in a way, but this just feels truly like seamless, like a seamless just like dance, just celebrating life and just kind of like finally, I don't know, like not like wanting to get back to your life, which is such a like beautiful thing that I think this movie does. And yeah, the freeze frame at the end is so great of him diving into like the harbor. It's just, yeah, it's so great.
An ending that literally could have just had Rodney Dangerfield come out and say, "Hey, everybody, we're all gonna get laid," and then the ending would happen. It wouldn't be that different.
Oh man, God, it is one of those endings though that I just constantly will just watch on YouTube, just like that clip.
Yes.
And
I played the game where I love the song, obviously. I agree with everything you said about the song. But at the same time, it goes with like so many other fucking like songs at the
Yeah.
same time. It's just like, it's so universally just like, because I think because the choreography, like we mentioned, is so clearly like, it's there. There definitely was like this sort of plan out, but it feels like he's just improvising because it's so
Right.
natural.
Yeah, it feels like he's improvising, and yet it feels like it is like this. Obviously, because there's so many camera movements and everything, like it's clearly like orchestrated. But yeah, there's that effortlessness that I just think is so wonderful. I love Mads Mikkelsen so much. I just think he's so great.
It really makes me even like feel more upset when Mads is in Hollywood movies, and more often than not, they just use his face. It's just like, we got the guy for like his mug.
Well, that's like Doctor
And it's-
Strange.
right, Doctor Strange 100% is that. Even to a certain degree, Indiana Jones, but I think he has fun. But like a bit that I still think about is when at one point he says like, "I'm not going back to Alabama,"
Yes.
which is like the best line reading of that whole movie.
In his very like Danish accent. But I love, like, he's great in Rogue One, I think. Like, I think he's very good in that movie and is very, very hot, but also very just...
One of the best
great
scenes in that
as
movie is
this-
the opening bit between like the face-off between him and Mendelsohn. It's like
I mean,
so well done.
Two of my favorite boys in this entire in all of Hollywood.
When's Mendelsohn gonna do his drunken movie?
God, I love Ben Mendelsohn so much, and he also just does like a lot of garbage. Like, no offense, but he's like, you know, he got caught up in the Marvel thing, and like, you know, he was in that Robin Hood movie. Remember that? Ugh.
He's my. I know we disagree on this movie, but he's easily my favorite thing about Ready Player One.
Oh, he's very good in Ready Player One.
Right, especially performing, like, my dream, honestly, I want to put this out more into the universe, I've said this elsewhere, but I really want Ben Mendelsohn to play Vince McMahon in a WWE movie, because that's basically what his performance in fucking Ready Player One is. He's basically playing Vince McMahon.
I can see that. Oh man, yeah. I have a very complicated relationship with that movie for obvious reasons, but I ultimately do like.
Is there a lot going into that?
Yeah, but I do like that movie. I mean, no, like the thing about Matt. To get back to like Mads for a second, like what I love when he pops up in Hollywood movies because like he can do it and he's very good. Like I would not say he's bad in Doctor Strange by any means. It is like that the movie just kind of wants to use him for him, not really give him a lot to do. But I think he works in Casino Royale. I think he's really really great, and he's even great in like that movie with where Willem Dafoe plays Vincent Van Gogh.
Oh, at
He's,
Eternity's
like-
Gate.
Yes, he's very good in that. He has like one scene. I think he's like the priest. And I've never seen the Pusher movies, but I feel like I should now even more since we're kind of talking about Mads.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely the Refn is interesting. Especially, have you ever seen Valhalla Rising?
I haven't. That was another one I also wanted to see.
That movie is like, it's so simple, but it's one of these like, it's a Viking gory epic that's 93 minutes long. And it's mostly just Mikkelson fucking being like a Viking warrior dude who just destroys people.
Hell yeah.
What more do you want out of cinema?
Destroy me, Mads.
Step on me, Mads.
Yes. No, but I love when he pops up in Hollywood movies because he's great, and I just love whenever he does pop up in something, there are people who like are not like freaks like us, where we kind of like we watch a bunch of movies and who are like, who is that guy? He is like really like he's so striking that like I love him in that stuff. I love him in like small movies like this, and I just love everything he does. He's great. Put him in Death Stranding 2, Kojima. I think I don't remember what happens to him at the end of that game. It's a weird game, but
Trivia. That was the game that I got right before my PS4 conked out. I literally had the game, and then I was trying to play it, and my PS4 has this problem where like I can never play anything with the disc because it'll eject out.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
That problem that I tried fixing. I did eject button and the power button at the same time multiple times. It doesn't work after a certain point, guys.
Well, look, I mean, if there's any incentive, I think he appears in the beginning of the game in like these like POV flashbacks. Many of them are him looking at you going like, you're from the perspective of, this is very complicated, and I swear it makes sense in the game, of a baby in a pod, and he's going like, my baby, and he's like holding you in his arms like this, and it's great. It's a great incentive enough to play that game. But
in conclusion, we want Mads to be our daddy.
Absolutely.
That's exactly what we all want. At the end of the day, that's what we all want. But you know what? Let's wrap up on another round. Bryan, go ahead. Your final thoughts on another round.
I love this movie so much. And I'm glad that we discussed it, I think, because it is, of course, like, I just feel like a lot of those movies from 2020, like, some of them I just don't think about that often anymore, but some of them I think about, and I'm like, oh yeah, that was a really great movie, and I just, like, my pandemic brain, like, I just completely, like, all of, like, to mention another one, like, the Small Axe movies came out in 2020, and, like, The Empty Man, like, just all these, like, great movies that are kind of, like, not lost to time, but just lost to this like weird point in time where everyone was just whatever. But I think this movie's. I'm also just glad because I got to really explore more of Vinterberg's filmography. I think he's really great at just character drama and bringing you into people's lives and just showcasing what their lives are like. And I think that that's such an interesting way that he explores that. And I don't know. I just really love this movie and how it explores just all of the ideas of alcohol and, like you said, like the relationship between people and alcohol, but also just toxic masculinity, sad, dejected men. But it, again, wraps it up in this very life-affirming package, which I was not expecting this movie to end in a very life-affirming way. And for it to just make me, like, want to dance like Mads Mikkelson on a bench. But, yeah, I love it. I love it even more having seen it again. I think Mads Mikkelson it's one of the best performances I've seen in the 2020s so far, I think. And yeah, I just always, he's one of those actors where I will watch almost anything he is in, even if it looks like shitty. Like that, like Polar. Do you remember that movie Polar, where he has like a eye patch?
Yes.
I've heard it's
yes.
like terrible, but I kind of want to see it for him because he is just immensely compelling, and like he really can do, you know, a lot. I mean, he can do so much where he can be, like we mentioned, menacing and really scary in something like Hannibal, and he can be really charming and hot in everything he's in. Or he can be
Including Hannibal.
Including Hannibal, of course. Because they're gay. That's the thing of the show. Come on.
That sounds like a real Fannibal take right there. Remember when that
Yes.
term existed?
Yes. But like you mentioned, like this kind of gives, like another round gives like every flavor of Mads, and I think that that's a really great point where he is just very good at playing these characters that are very like internal, right? And they're just in their heads. They're not, you know, he's not very. It's funny that you evoked like Nicolas Cage because they're so different, right? Nicolas Cage is like a very big actor, and Mads is not really that. I mean, he's very nuanced. He's very subtle. There's just so much about him that I love, and yeah, I love this movie, and I could talk about it even more for hours because I think it's great, but I will leave it there. Yeah, what about you, Thomas?
I mean, I agree with everything you said. I love this movie. I think it's definitely one of the better movies of like this weird sort of new period that we talk about on the show, from 2020 forward. And I think what's so fascinating about it is, like we mentioned, like it has such weird tonal shifts, and it makes, you know, has incredibly funny moments. Like there's just a bit I love where Mangus is like they're all at that teacher conference where initially we found some alcohol, and we think it might be the children are stowing this away because they banned alcohol at the start of this school period. And just the shot of him where he's like covering his mouth, just like, oh.
Where he's like, ugh, he's like, oh shit, is it like, are we caught?
Right, but he's hiding it with his hands. He's like, oh.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
like have moments like that, but then also really like devastating bits, like the bit at Thomas Bo Larson's funeral where the kids sing.
Oh
like-
my gosh, yes,
What a wonderfully, beautifully like sad moment. I think honestly, the reason I think I have sort of more of this like affection for this movie is I'm gonna get a bit personal here. I'm not gonna go into extreme detail. A friend of mine who I knew from college had a drinking problem. You know, I hung out so much with them. They were one of my dearest friends, but there were points where they had really bad nights that I was privy to, where I had a couple drinks and they had a bit too many. And that was a constant struggle with them to the degree that they died very young. You know, they went out drinking and there was a point where they didn't come back. And I feel like this movie does such a great job of kind of capturing the weird mixed feeling I have with alcohol because of my relationship with that person, where I do have that kind of like, I've seen how far alcohol can go, and I can see how it could, you know, take somebody I truly like love dearly. But at the same time, I have a lot of fun memories of getting drunk with
Right.
them.
Yeah.
I have all, because we were, you know, friends in college this whole time, so we had a lot of fun memories of us doing just dumb shit while we were drinking, or even post college. One of my favorite memories with that person was when we saw like Rogue One, and then we got drunk and like played cards and sang dumb songs together. That kind of thing. So I think it's a movie that captures really that kind of, you know, that mixed feeling of just like alcohol, because it's this tool, this social lubricant. It can be very beneficial, and it can be very like detrimental completely to you. It's, you know, just how you have that relationship with this thing that really matters. And I think this movie captures that wonderfully, all the way down to like it's fucking, like I said, one of the great endings
Absolutely.
of movies in recent memory, truly. The main reason I would recommend this to anybody, especially if you have sort of an issue, even if you have an issue with, you know, foreign films with subtitles, this like transcends any language barrier.
10-inch barrier, man. I think
Yes.
about that all the time. No, yeah, absolutely. I think I would kind of say this is a very good kind of first foreign film for some people. I mean, despite kind of it being a bit upsetting, I think it's like a very good, just dramatic film as a whole. And like, of course, like also the themes are universal and everything, all of that stuff. But I think like, yeah, it is just a great story and a great like just the way it's told is really great. Also, you reminded me of a scene we didn't talk about, but where speaking of the kid with the glasses, where he like holds his hand when they're like doing like I forget what they're doing, but he holds Tommy's like hand, and it is just such a fucking it just that moment gets me so much. But what an ending! I literally every time I've watched this movie, I watched the ending like 3 times, where I just like rewound it like one more time. Let's go. Let's just watch it one more time.
You watch it a couple times, and then you're like, I should watch this after with a drink. So you watch it a couple times while you drank that drink.
Oh yeah.
Well, on that note, I think we're done talking about another round. Well, the bar's closed on another round.
Yeah, last round.
I can safely say last round, because of course we got to do our segment that we do every single episode, Between the Lines. So, Between the Lines is a segment where Bryan and I recommend another film that's sort of related to the movie that we're talking about in some way, or maybe could be an alternate pick for like an end for new kind of thing. So, Bryan, you go ahead and go first. What is your pick for Between the Lines this week?
Yes, I wanted to go with another international film that also won at the Oscars from the next year. And I am picking Drive My Car from Ryosuke Hamaguchi, which is based off a Haruki Murakami book. And it is a film about a theater director who his wife tragically passes away very suddenly, and he is also putting on a production of Uncle Vanya at the same time. That's all I'll say, actually, because I think this is a masterpiece, and I think this is one of the great films of the decade. I think it will definitely be in that discussion. It is 3 hours long, but it is so compelling and so beautiful. And I think everything about this movie is so heartbreaking and yet kind of life-affirming in a similar way to Another Round, where he gets to where he's doing the theater production, and he is told that he cannot drive his car, and someone else will drive him back and forth from his residence to the theater. And it just reveals itself as a genuinely great film about grief. And I know that like I said that and it sounded like, you know, everyone's like rolling their eyes, but like
3 hour grief movie, 3 hour grief. That's what they're all doing at home.
This movie does not feel like 3 hours to me, really. I mean, obviously it is long. It is a very long movie. It is pretty slow, I would say, but I think once you become immersed in it, it just goes. And it is a really beautiful movie. The way that this movie is shot, I think is just unbelievable, where there are these like really wonderful ways that like he is shooting the driving, like, and it's not like he's shooting it like an action scene, but it's just these like really wide shots and just the car, which is this incredible car. It's a red Saab Turbo 900. If you don't know what the car looks like, look it up. It's just a really incredible looking car, like from a visual standpoint.
Yes.
And it looks incredible. I think it's a really great movie about not just grief, but also just the creative process and art, and, you know, art meeting life, and just balancing those two things, but also great vibes. Weirdly enough, like there's a wonderful scene where two people just smoke cigarettes outside of like a sunroof, and it is just so incredible. And also has a lot of really funny moments as well. Like I love. There's a scene at a dinner which I really love, which is great. But anyways, sorry. Yeah, I really love this movie. It is a movie I saw in theaters, and I just thought, like, wow, that's really great. And I have just kept on thinking about it for the past few years. And in the way that it truly does cope with the idea of grief in a way that I've just... it doesn't hit as hard for me in other movies as this. Like, this really hit hard for me in a way I just wasn't expecting, and in a way that I think is just absolutely incredible. If I'm being a bit vague here, I think I would love the movie to just speak for itself, because it is just an incredible movie. And I think that everyone should see it. And, it's currently streaming on Max, which, I'll be honest, feels a bit sacrilegious watching it. Like, I was a bit disgusted with myself watching this.
Getting through that ugly-ass interface to get to drive my car.
Right, just watching this, like, incredibly moving, like, masterpiece on, like, Max.
To be fair, it was HBO Max at the time.
It was
still HBO Max. It was still in the halcyon days. People forget back in 2022 when HBO Max was a really good streaming service.
It was one of the best streaming service, and like a great like interface, and like just, oh god, Max is such a piece of shit. But please do not be deterred. This movie is absolutely incredible. Some incredible performances that are just so human and so I don't know, like this movie really cuts deep for me in a way that I was not expecting, and in a way that I don't really connect with. Like, I don't connect with movies about grief as much personally, but this is one of the ones that I think just really stuck with me. Has a great ending, great music as well. Drive My Car, also a great Beatles song, which completely unrelated, the two.
Come on, baby, drive my car.
Yeah. Beep 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 beep. But yes, have you seen this movie? Have you seen Drive My Car?
I've seen Drive My Car, and I like Drive My Car.
Okay.
I don't love Drive My Car, but then again, I do have the weird thing where I was gonna see it in a theater at an art theater in Michigan when I was visiting Adam, former host of Devil Edge Double Bill, and then I found out, like, up in Michigan, that like that place is located in downtown Detroit, where a shooting had happened a week prior.
Oh.
So it was like, how about I don't do that? And then I watched it on HBO Max. So it might not have been the most ideal circumstances. I made sure I had my phone off. I was like, I'm really going to get sucked into this. And I quite wasn't, but I would still be willing to give it another shot. I still liked it. I agree with you. The cigarette shot in particular, I do think about a lot. That's a beautiful shot. It's an incredibly well-directed movie. In fairness, that was the Oscars of Worst Person in the World, right?
I believe so.
Right, it was in competition, I believe,
Let
with
me...
Drive My Car.
Yes, we had that.
Yes.
Flea, that like the animated film. The Hand of God, the Paolo Sorrentino movie. And then a movie called Lunana, A Yak in the Classroom, which I have not heard about, but I'm glad that it was nominated for Best International Film.
I would still say my favorite's probably Worst Person in the World, but I still liked Drive My Car.
For me, at least, they're very close to each other. I think those are both some of the best films of the decade so far. That's actually, now that you mention it, that's a bonus recommendation. Watch The Worst Person in the World, because
wonderful movie, beautiful movie.
One day we will talk about Joachim Trier, who is one of my top 3 directors working today.
A movie that made me feel uncomfortably seen.
A quick story here. I saw that movie. Most of the times I see movies, I see them like weekday in like the daytime. So like, there's not a lot of people there. And like, if it is, it's like old people, or whatever. I saw The Worst Person in the World by myself in the theater, and I was so happy that I was the only one, because I was bawling for the entire runtime. So I was really happy that I was the only one in the theater.
I'm gonna go ahead and do my pick now, and my pick is in a similar vein, a 2020 Mads Mikkelsen starring Danish film that I literally finished right before we started recording this podcast. It's called Riders of Justice from director Anders Thomas Jensen. And basically, it's this movie in which we follow Mads, who is this guy who at the very beginning, he is a soldier who's served in Afghanistan and he's coming back home, while his wife and his daughter are taking the train to go see him return. A horrible accident happens on this train, leaving the mother dead and the daughter alive but still very shaken. And one of the other people who was on that train, who we initially kind of follow at the opening part of the movie, puts everything down into like a form of statistics. So yeah, at a certain point, this guy who was on the train, who's a statistics guy, comes over to Mads' house with some of his buddies who also work. Like one of them is the facial analyst guy, and one of them is like a hacker who can like hack into things. And they're all just like, hey, you know what? We're bringing this up. Like, it might have been a hit because the other person who was on this train was like this leader of the biker gang, the titular Riders of Justice. So it becomes this revenge movie a bit, but also in the process, what I love about this movie, because it's also a comedy, strangely, despite how like dark and sort of death wishy this all sounds, there's a great sort of like dude's rock quality to this movie as well. Because our 4-pack of these great Danish lads, it's just so charming to see them all, like, they're very different personalities, and they all come together, and they all kind of, like, try and disguise the fact that they're doing this from Mads' daughter, particularly, like, the one guy who basically acts as, like, oh, he lies and says, like, oh, I'm a psychologist, because the daughter is having these issues where it's like, oh, Mads, my dad is, like, getting too deep into, like, his violence because of his soldier past and all this other stuff. He's had a history of violent tendencies. And so she's like, oh, you're actually seeing an analyst, that's great. But then that guy tries to like give her analysis about just like, oh, how she's dealing with death and stuff like that. So it's this weird, like, kind of comedic, but also very unsettling kind of angle to all this. And I think there's some great action sequences. I want to really shout out my particular favorite of the ensemble, who isn't Mads. So obviously, look, Mads is great in this movie. He has like a big beard.
Hell yeah.
And he's mostly bald as well. The other guy besides Mads who I love is Nicholas Bro, who was also in Warhorse, the facial analyst guy. And he's kind of like a bigger dude who has like this great like mustache. You wouldn't assume anything about him, but he ends up being kind of good with a gun. There's a whole scene where like he puts together a gun very quickly. It's like, I just like assembling things. And he's just like really fucking good at it somehow. And he has like so many great moments throughout the whole movie. But yeah, Riders of Justice. It's on Hulu as well. You can watch another round, then watch Riders of Justice. It's a great Mads double feature.
Okay. I have not seen this movie. I remember when it came out, and I remember just, again, it was a movie where I was like, I don't know anything about it, but Mads is in it, so I would like to see it, and I never did. But I am looking at the cast list here, and one of the guys, Lars Brigman, has worked on a few of Thomas Vinterberg's films. He was in Celebration and in Kursk, so that's interesting. Another interesting connection.
Yeah, he's very good in the movie as well. He plays the guy who's kind of like the hacker guy.
I can see that. Yeah.
He does a wonderful job at it, yeah. But yeah, so let's go ahead and repeat our titles for everybody, Bryan, so they can add them to their watch lists and whatnot.
Yes, I had Ryusuke Hamaguchi's 2021 film. One of his 2021 films. He released 2 films in 2021, but Drive My Car.
And I had the other 2020 Danish film starring Mads Mikkelson you can now watch on Hulu, Riders of Justice. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and wrap up here and just do our exit. But we got a few people to thank before we head out of here, Bryan. We got to thank Burial Grid for our music. Purchase his music at burialgrid.com. Thanks to Michelle Kyle for our artwork. Find her at MishKyle96. We also want to thank our patrons. Patreon.com/cinema2letter, where for just $1 a month, you all get to vote for individual episode, topics out there that we'll cover for the season, and also listen to bonus podcasts. Like we would have already put out the Critic Retrospective fairly recently. Also, our big review roundup for January of 2023, where we talked about a lot of the newer releases, and also near the end of February, our big bonus podcast for that will be our awards show, the Los Awards, which stands for, of course, Letters of Cinematic Excellence.
Of course.
An acronym that we settled on because we couldn't think of anything else.
Yeah, you guys come up with something better.
We kept the acronym thing. That was the important thing. And, speaking of the Los Awards, I should mention the day after this episode comes out, so on Wednesday, February 7th, there will be a call to action post for all the Cineast patrons out there. Basically, what we're asking for is just your top 5 movies from 2023 that you all saw, and we'll tabulate based on the top 5s that we get, the top 3 that are most recurring, and then we'll have a poll come out in which patrons will get to vote on the Cineast Choice Award for the Los Awards. We're calling it the Cineast Choice Award for, what you all declare to be the best movie 2023. So that call to action post will come out, and we'll just ask once again for your top 5s to be posted in the comments. And then, we'll get together a poll probably the week after, and you all get to vote on what wins the Cineast Choice Los Award. Just thank you all once again, just for that $1. It really helps out the show when you become Cineast patrons. That's our nickname for you, Cineasts, the true cinema lovers out there, for just $1 a month. But you can find us, speaking of Cinema Number 2 Letter, that's our social handle on places like Instagram, Blue Sky, Facebook, Twitter, all the great places that you love to be at.
That makes society a better place, really.
Right, truly, yes. And you can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd at NotTheWho'sTommy. And I also do some writing at marianithomas.wordpress.com and at film-cred.com, which I just want to shout out. I produce the show Film Cred Review. That's on Film Cred's Patreon. For $1, you can listen to that and the other great stuff that they have on that Patreon. But I was the guest, and I came from behind the mic to talk with Jael Peralta about January movies. Ooh. So we just kind of go through, kind of inspired by The Beekeeper, truly. A movie I still can't stop thinking about. Oi, Beekeeper. But yeah, so you can listen to that. Jael and I had a fun time discussing that, and also some news like the SAG nomination and stuff like that. Fun time.
Yeah, and I'm also still kind of on Twitter. You can follow me at BRYANDRADE and the number 3. Or you can follow me on Letterboxd, where I'm much more active, and I just made a Thomas Vinterberg list, so you can see my ranking for his films, the ones that I've seen at least, and follow me on there.
And you know what? Just shout out also on my Letterboxd, you can see my Mads Mikkelson ranked list, which I recently created.
That's a hot list.
It's so hot. It truly just, I had to look away after I finished it. I couldn't stare too long into its beautiful eyes. But for more of us, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, whatever platform you get your podcasts on. If you're listening on Talk Film Society, our great network, why not listen to all the other great shows that are on the network, like the Talk Film Society podcast, which we were recently on. Bryan and I had a lot of fun. And you can also dig into our archives and our Podbean main feed for, all the episodes of Cinema to the Letter so far, and the old Double Edge Double Bill stuff. Bunch of stuff you can listen to on there. And, if you can't support us on the Patreon, that's cool. Money can be tight for some people. But the free way to help us out is to rate, review, or simply share the show around to give us more visibility, to give us more, audio drinking buddies. Make us audio drinking buddies for other people. Podcasting is like you're hanging out parasocially with people you're not in a room with. And we'll all have a drink. Yeah, let's do it. Cheers to you, Jeffrey. That's right, all you Jeffreys. I mean, all of you.
God, one person listening who's Jeffreys is like, yes!
Cracking open a cold one. Well, on that note, Bryan, we should at least tease our next episode. In our rotation, we're hitting the E for egregious. And we're entering into completely uncharted territory for either of us. Because we'll be covering the 1952 Best Picture winner, The Greatest Show on Earth, from Cecil B. DeMille, one of the more apparently infamous bad Best Picture winners, per reputation, at least.
Yes, a movie I know absolutely nothing about other than the clip I've seen in Steven Spielberg's The Fabelmans, which would lead me to believe that it's a masterpiece, but I guess we'll find out.
Even Sammy Fableman at a very young age, you're easy to please at that point. Cass. All I know about this movie is like that bit, of course, the Spielberg lore, and also that Jimmy Stewart's in it, but like in a sort of he's the ant, as apparently I think he plays like a clown at the circus.
This all sounds great to me. And Jimmy Stewart, he's a clown. I'm in.
I can't wait to watch all 2.5 hours of it. It's a very long film, but which we'll talk about next time. But until then, everybody, you know what? Let's have a drink, Bryan. Cheers!
Yeah, cheers. Let's get a drink.